Welcome to Chapter 11 on Islamic political ideologies. So this chapter, you'll see it's a little bit different. So remember, most of this in our textbook we've seen where political ideology is thought of as values and beliefs held dear by, or held to be as truth by a group of people, right? So again, we've talked about how those are usually mutually reinforcing, where you bring stuff into your ideology that you hold dear, and then you push stuff out that you don't. So this adds a little bit of a wrinkle to it where in this instance, we bring in a little bit of a religious aspect, obviously, with the religion of Islam. So again, ideology, remember, is different from theology, which again is more devoted to the kind of the study of the divine, that type of stuff. But in this instance, when we look at Islamic political ideology, it's important to think about how in many respects that when you don't think about having a defined separation of church and state, then of course, if that's not the case, then of course the faith and the political will be kind of blended, right? That they're going to be very much one and the same. So let's get started here. So like in the other chapters, we have some sort of core things we want to look at with related to Islam. So these are just some good sort of factual things for you to know. So you can see here in the bold, when we refer to someone who follows the Islamic faith as Muslim, of course. So it's just an Arabic term that can be loosely translated to one who submits. So Islam refers to submission. So Islam is submission. So then Muslim is one who submits. So again, you can kind of see the connection there. So Islam is currently the second largest world religion after Christianity. So currently has over 1 billion adherents to the faith and is growing fast. And we also see that in the world today, about 50, or actually more than 50 countries are predominantly Islamic. So again, thinking about, we have about 200 countries in the world overall. There's 193 UN member states, if that kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking at for the whole world. So out of those, more than 50 are predominantly Islamic. So thinking about Muslims in the world, I wanted to show you this map here. So again, you can see this is from CNN. We look at world Muslim populations. So growth of Muslim population by country. So you can see in many areas, right? So again, the darkest green here, 200% or greater increase. So for example, you might not think about, Canada here, right? Whereas in 1990 had 313,000 Muslims. 20 years later in 2010, right about triple that number, 940,000, right? So even in the United States, 70%, right? So 1990, a little over 1,500 or 1,500,000. 2010, 2,600,000. Now again, so some other figures that I have used show there's over 5 million Muslims in the United States. So a lot of times this depends on who's reporting, how people self-identify, so on and so forth. But it's also interesting to note. So again, you can see, as a result of the Muslim immigration to Europe. So again, Spain, 276% increase there, right? Poland, again, you wouldn't think about having, many Muslims. Czech Republic, right? A lot of Germany, for example. So again, nearly 5 million Muslims in Germany today. So you can see how it's, growing quickly there. So like Christianity, Islam has as one of its sort of core tenets the idea of proselytizing, right? So again, that's the idea of sort of, not just believing what you believe, but then actively working to sort of, share your beliefs, sort of spread the gospel, as it is, so to try to sort of recruit or to get others into the faith. Where the third major Abrahamic religion, Judaism, Jews do not proselytize. So again, it's a little bit different there than Islam and Christianity. All right, so moving forward here. All right, so you can see this map gives you a good idea of, well, where do Muslims live in the world today? So this is distribution of Muslim population by country and territory, but it only shows you the countries with more than 1 million Muslims, right? So obviously in some areas, like I just showed you in the previous map, Poland has 20,000 people or something. That's not going to be indicated on this map. But as your textbook mentions, Muslims in large part, if you see where the cursor is here, are found in this sort of arc, or sort of found in this band, stretching from in large part sort of North Africa, across even large part, in this some areas of sub-Saharan Africa, but then across here, through Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, all the way over to Indonesia in the Far East. So as you can see here, so Indonesia is the largest predominantly Muslim country in the world today. So you can see even the United States, right, is listed in this map, because again, so estimates range between say about 3 to 8 million Muslims currently living in the United States. So this kind of gives you a good idea of where folks that would identify as Muslim, where do they live in the world today. So this is a little dated, right, so from 2009, but overall this wouldn't have changed dramatically since that time. All right, this is I thought you might find this to be an interesting representation. So sometimes, again, thinking about this or your other courses, we often look at ideas of how can you most effectively convey information. So sometimes, for example, say the New York Times or other major publications, that's one thing to just have a nicely written news article, but if it has some type of graphic attached to it or some sort of other thing that really sort of grabs your attention, it really has a nice way of sort of capturing that information, that can really add a lot to the picture here. So you can see here, this is the world distribution of Muslim population. So up here on the right, all right, so again, this is from 2009, so we've actually passed 7 billion people at this point. But in large part, this graphic wouldn't have changed dramatically since that time. So out of the 7 billion or so total people in the world, about 1.5 million of them are sorry, 1.5 billion or so are Muslims. So again, so this is how they would weight each country's relative size based on its Muslim population. So remember, I just told you, so we just talked about Indonesia being the largest Muslim country in the world today. So you can see the, again, weighted population here. So again, Indonesia would be the largest, over 203, or about somewhere between 200 and 220 million Muslims. Or so for example, Pakistan, right? India, again, places with huge Muslim populations. So again, you can see kind of the northern part of Africa here, where really is almost about the same number of Muslims in Nigeria, in West Africa, as there is in all of Egypt, right? And then you can see sort of Canada, United States, Argentina down in South America, and then of course some of the European countries. So again, this kind of just gives you a good idea of where these folks would live. Again, the weighted population. So again, just instead of just sort of having a table or something like that, I think graphics like this can often be very helpful to display information. So looking at, well, if we look at the Muslim population in the world today, what are some characteristics of that? So some statistics that's surprising to a lot of folks is that less than 20%, actually only about 18% of all Muslims in the world are Arabs, where, again, thinking about sort of some of those large Muslim populations in places like Pakistan, Indonesia, again, much larger populations than any of the Arab countries in the Middle East. So you can see where it easily comprises over 80% of Muslims living outside the Arab countries. So you might have heard of these two terms as well, hopefully, when we think about Muslims in the world today, the Sunni and Shia divide, or Shia is also sometimes referred to as Shiite. It's the same thing. But when we look at these two, that the overwhelming majority of Muslims in the world are Sunni. You see about 85%. So then the other, so again, about over 10% are Shia, and then there's several smaller sects as well that we'll look at as well in this chapter. So your textbook gives you this idea of the growth of Islam as a political force. So again, we're trying to, this chapter isn't just about Islam as a religion. We're wanting to focus in on Islamic political ideology. So how does the sort of Islamic faith, how does that intersect with politics and society, those type of things. So again, growth of Islam as a political force. So your book lists four major factors here that I think do have, relate very much so to this growth. So one would be the establishment of the state of Israel in 1948. Right. So again, that since that time has been seen as sort of a many Muslims have not been exceptionally thrilled with that. That the idea of the establishment of a Jewish state in what they see as their, large part traditional homeland has kind of led to this sort of political and religious backlash against it. Then we also see the sort of rapid rise of oil prices. So, the rise in oil prices led many of the Islamic states of the Middle East to have just this huge new amount of money, right? So it kind of led them to have more economic status, more political status, to kind of be able to throw their weight around in the world a bit more, particularly as a result of the oil crisis and the development of OPEC, right? The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, of which some of the major members are the Arab states. So then, kind of more related to the Shia group, we also have the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which hopefully you're familiar with, where the Shah of Iran was overthrown, and sort of more of a hardline, sort of conservative, religious clerics, Ayatollah Khomeini, took over then in 1979. So that's when it's 400 something day, 420 days, I believe, where the Iranian students, basically laid siege to the U.S. embassy there and held a number of Americans hostage there, and they weren't released until President Reagan came into office in 1981. So then, if the fourth factor here is decolonization, where if we look at, again, so much of Africa and the Middle East and other areas were colonized by some of the great European powers, Britain and France in particular. But we also saw, where there was heavy influence from Belgium, Russia, a lot of other countries. So once many of those countries went through the decolonization process and sort of were able to emerge, from their colonial oppression. So, for example, when say like a predominantly Muslim state was able to sort of have a sort of newfound independence and political spirit, obviously Islam was going to be a huge part of that, which might have been more, you could say, more suppressed, or maybe wasn't, obviously wasn't going to be as important if, with a French government or British or something like that. So then the last term here, vocabulary term I wanted you to be aware of is Islamism, right? So this is this, we think about much more of sort of very conservative, much more sort of, stick to tradition, much more. So this movement rejecting modernization and westernization. So, for example, we'll talk about later in the chapter the Nigerian group that the United States and other governments have labeled a terrorist group, Boko Haram. In Nigeria, haram just means like forbidden in Arabic. So something like haram could be smoking or alcohol or something like that. So Boko just means Western education or sort of Western teachings, that type of thing. So Boko Haram just means Western teachings are forbidden. So again, that would be a good example of the sort of a sort of Islamist group there. So when we look at Islam, we want to look at what are some of the core beliefs. So I think we'll go ahead and stop here. and I'll continue on with the beliefs in the second video.